first part of this video, you learn how to make a frequency distribution table and how to solve quartiles for the group data. Now, we will discuss decile for the group data, how to solve decile for the group data. Deciles are those values that divide a set of data into 10 equal parts. The Kth decile, denoted by d sub k, is computed as follows. That's d sub k equals LB plus the quantity kn over 4 minus Cf sub b all over f sub d sub k times I, where LB is the lower boundary of the d sub k class, Cf sub b is the cumulative frequency of the class before the decile class, n is the total frequency, f sub d sub k is the frequency of the decile class, I is the size of the class interval, and k is the Kth decile, where k is either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. For our first example, Brad collects plastic bottles every month from the 50 houses in his barangay. The data for the collection last month is summarized in the table below. Calculate d sub 3 and d sub 8 and interpret the result. So here's the table. We have to complete the table by filling in the lower boundary and the less than cumulative frequency. So take note also that yung class interval natin ay in kilogram kasi weight yan siya ng plastic bottles. So to complete the table, start tayo sa lower boundary by looking at the lower limit and subtract each of the lower limit 0.5. So 3 minus 0.5 is 2.5. 6 minus 0.5 is 5.5. 9 minus 0.5 is 8.5. 12 minus 0.5 is 11.5. 15 minus 0.5 is 14.5. And 18 minus 0.5 is 17.5. And for the less than cumulative frequency, we will copy the first frequency here. Okay? So, dapat same dito. And then, 4 plus 9 is 13. 13 plus 10 is 23. 23 plus 12 is 35. 35 plus 8 is 43. And 43 plus 7 is 50. So take note that the last cumulative frequency here should coincide sa total frequency. Okay? So dapat magkaparehas ang value ng dalawa. So for the size of the class interval, that's 3. We have 3. Since 3, 4, 5, that's the distance from the lower limit to the upper limit. So let's solve for d sub 3. So d sub 3, we have to locate the d sub 3 class. That's by kn over 10 kasi decile, so the denominator is 10, where k is 3 times n is 50. Okay, so 3 times 50 divided by 10 is 15. So titignan natin sa cumulative frequency kung saan 15 is less than or equal to. So 15 is greater than 4, hindi dito. 15 is greater than 13, hindi dito. 15 is less than 23. So, it means that d sub 3 class is here. So, sa class interval 9 to 11, yung d sub 3 natin. And, let's identify the values. Dito tayo kukuha din ng values na kailangan natin sa formula. So, kn over 10 is 15. Okay, that's 15. Lower boundary is 8.5. Cf sub b, take note, yung Cf sub b is the cumulative frequency before d sub 3 class. So, yung Cf sub b natin ay 13. Then, frequency of d sub 3 class is 10 and the size of the class interval is 3. We already have the values needed in the formula. Let's plug in. Let's use the formula for decile. So d sub 3 equals LB plus the quantity Kn over 10 minus Cf sub B all over F sub d sub 3 times I. So lower boundary is 8.5. Kn over 10 is 15. Cumulative frequency before d sub k is 13. Frequency of d sub 3 is 10, and the size of the class interval is 3. So simplify natin ito una. 15 minus 13 is 2. 2 divided by 10 times 3 is 0.6. 40.5 plus 0.6 is 9.1. Take note that in kilogram tayo, that's why yung unit natin ay kilogram. So d sub 3 is 9.1 kilogram. Therefore, since d sub 3 is in decile, that's 30%, 30% of the plastic bottles weighs less than or equal to 9.1 kilogram. So for d sub 8, let's locate the d sub 8 class. So that's by using the formula Kn over 10, where K is 8 and N is 50 over 10. 8 times 50 divided by 10 is 40. So now, let's look at the less than cumulative frequency where 40 is less than or equal to. So 40 is greater than 4, 40 is greater than 13, 40 is greater than 23, 40 is greater than 35, and 40 is less than 43. So it means that d sub 8 class is in the class interval 5 to 17. So we're going to get the values to solve for d sub 8 here. So here's where we can locate d sub 8 class. So to identify the values, Kn over 10 is 40. Lower boundary is 14.5. Cf sub B, that's the cumulative frequency before d sub 8 class, so that's 35. And the frequency of the d sub 8 class is 8, and the size of the class interval is 3. So since we already have the values needed to solve for d sub 8, we can now proceed to the formula. So d sub 8 equals LB plus quantity Kn over 10 minus Cf sub B all over F sub d sub 8 times I. So LB, the lower boundary is 14.5 plus Kn over 10 is 40 minus the cumulative frequency before d sub 8 is 35 all over the frequency is 8 times the size of the class interval is 3. So simplify natin ito. 40 minus 35 is 5. 5 divided by 8 times 3 is 1.88. 14.5 plus 1.88 is 16.38. So, since the unit is kilogram, it means d sub 8 equals 16.38 kilogram. So, for the interpretation, since d sub 8 is 80% in decile, therefore, 80% of the plastic bottles weighs less than or equal to 16.38 kilogram. So now, let's proceed with the percentile for the group data. The percentile of group data is used to characterize values according to the percentage below them. And to solve for the percentile for group data, we will use this formula. P sub k equals LB plus the quantity Kn over 100 minus Cf sub B all over F sub P sub k times I. Okay, so where LB again is the lower boundary. CF sub B natin ay the cumulative frequency of the class before the percentile class. N is the total frequency. F sub P sub K is the frequency of the percentile class. I is the size of the class interval, and K is the kth percentile, where K is either 1, 2, 3, 2, 99. So here's our example. Below is the data on the distances traveled by 150 participants in the fundraising marathon Takbo para sa Kinabukasan. Find P sub 30. So to solve for P sub 30, we have to locate the P sub 30 class first. So that's by Kn over 100 equals K is 30 and N is 150. The total frequency, that's 150 over 100. So 30 times 150 divided by 100 is 45. So we will look at the less than cumulative frequency where 45 is less than or equal to. 45 is greater than 16, 45 is greater than 34, 45 is less than 63. It means that P sub 30 class is here in the class interval 7 to 9. So now, we can get the values needed here. And to identify the values, Kn over 100, that's 45. Lower boundary is 6.5. CF sub B, take note, that's the cumulative frequency before P sub 30 class. So, that's 34. And the frequency of the P sub 30 class is 29. And the size of the class interval is 3. So since we already have the values needed to solve for P sub 30, we can now use the formula for percentile. So P sub 30 equals LB plus the quantity Kn over 100 minus CF sub B all over F sub P sub 30 times I. So LB is 6.5 plus Kn over 100 is 45. CF sub B is 34 over the frequency of P sub 30 is 29 times 3. So we will simplify this first. 45 minus 34 is 11. 11 divided by 29 times 3 is 1.14. 6.5 plus 1.14 is 7.64. Since the class interval is in kilometer, the unit is km. So P sub 30 equals 7.64 km, kilometer. Therefore, 30 is 30%. So P sub 30 is 30%. So 30% of all the participants traveled less than or equal to 7.64 kilometer.